I want to keep this short. For starters, if you didn't see my last video where I explained this in more depth, gender and sex are different things. Sex is the biological characteristics. So this is like chromosomes, genitals, gonads, those sorts of things. It's a very scientific thing. We don't use sex when talking about people outside of the scientific realm. Gender, though, is what we'd use generally in our society. And this is different. This is the societal and cultural expectations and norms that we generally attribute to sex. And gender is really dumb. And by that, I don't mean the distinction between sex and gender is dumb. I think gender itself, there being characteristics assigned to sex, it's dumb. Anyways, if you really examine the genders in our current cultural situation, you find like a common trend. Men hold superiority to women. Very simple, basic trend. There's also the trend of there being only two genders, which is really dumb, but that's a whole other video. This trend of men holding superiority to women is what people like to call patriarchy. I got on this tangent of thinking recently after seeing on like my ex's Instagram story or something, a post about feminism, and it was along these lines. People shouldn't be called feminists. It should just be the other way around, where people that aren't feminists should be called sexists. And this idea here stems out of another post that I saw, same person, about how if you're not feminist, then you don't support equality. So if you are a feminist, you support equality of the genders. If you're not, you don't support equality of the genders. I think feminism does go farther than being just egalitarian, though. Like there's a lot more to it. So one thing, feminism involves an understanding and a disliking of patriarchy. I think that's kind of one of the most basic things of feminism. But even more than that, if you're a feminist and you just dislike patriarchy, but that's it, I feel like you technically could call yourself a feminist, but I feel like that's not really feminism, because you also need to want to do something. You want to have solutions for this, or like have ideas of how you're going to fix this, even if it's something as small as just voting in the left-wing party rather than the right-wing party kind of deal. So to fix patriarchy, let's actually try to get some ideas of how to do this. So one, of course, idea is commonly used, subsidizing women's products, because there's the pay gap and the pink tax, which is certain women's products and girls' products are more expensive just because they can be. And there are some reasons for that, like, oh, they use different materials for this, or they use, but like sometimes it's just really stupid. And like a lot of the time, if you just subsidize those products, making it so that they're equal, that could be a solution. But I feel like that doesn't fix the actual problem, which is patriarchy. It's like a band-aid. If you want actual change, you have to think a little more radically. My first big idea, really, of two, is tax churches. Right now, in most countries, churches are not taxed. They're practically a business. They make tons of money by getting 10% of most people's incomes that go there, and guilting them either into it, or just it's like some sort of secret pact that's like, oh yeah, if you're part of the church, that's just a thing you do, because it says that in the Bible at some point. Yeah, they're practically a business. They get consistent payments. They set up satellite businesses, or satellite churches, in other places so they can get more revenue. And they employ people, like businesses, to do multiple different things to keep the church going. So the government should really stop giving them the blind eye. They should tax them, just like they tax any other business, right? If they did that, most churches would have to either tithe higher, so guilt people for more of their money, and in that case, people would actually start to question their beliefs and be like, okay, is it actually worth it to continue believing that there's an invisible man in the sky? They'll start to question more. They'll start to think about it. It'll actually be an important part of their lives, and many people would be discouraged from going to church. That's good. On top of that, many churches would have to close if they can't do that, or if people don't pay, or if people leave. Many churches would have to close. So Christianity would collapse in a big part in our country. It's literally just government not taking taxes that like props up churches and makes them thrive. It should be very difficult to have these churches exist. Why I say this all is because if Christianity collapsed, Christianity is one of the main reasons why patriarchy still exists. Because Christianity, if you didn't know, is a very patriarchal religion, and many religious people are on the right wing, which are people that are not going to be feminists. The reason that they're on the right wing on this, especially on this issue, is because the Bible has set up this idea of the patriarchy, and this is what a family unit is supposed to be. This is what all of this gender roles, all this is supposed to work towards, is setting up a patriarchal society. And if you question a religious person on this and try to change their mind, they're just going to go back on the faith thing, where it's like, oh, I just have faith in this. This is what I believe. And then you can't really argue with them, because it's like, well, yeah, you believe that. It's stupid and dangerous and damages society. But yes, you do believe this. You have the right to, because the government's not going to stop you from believing this. That's what a right is. So, sure, you do you, but at the same time you're hurting people and the belief is damaging, but you have to hold it because you have to stay consistent with your biblical view, right? So it's very damaging. So if Christianity falls, that's one of the biggest blocks in toppling patriarchy as a whole. I could give a few more actually, like small ones, but no, I'm not going to do that. I want to keep this video short. So this is my favorite one of all time. Abolish gender. Gender is literally what patriarchy stands on. It's the ground on which patriarchy needs to exist. So if you take down the genders and you make it so genders don't exist, where it's like a man and a woman, we don't use those terms. Those terms don't mean anything. The attributes that we assign to those in our culture just don't exist. It's like, oh yeah, well, people are people. We all have the same things. We probably have different experiences in subtle ways. Like obviously cis women, at least, won't have to deal with having spontaneous erections, and cis guys won't have to deal with like periods or whatever, but they're for the most part, those are sexual things, and we could see those instead of being gendered things, we can see those as being sex things, where, oh, you are this sex, so you have this certain experience. It would be used in a very scientific way, rather than having any idea of gender be involved. This would also save trans people from having to do major, really expensive surgeries to transition to their sex, because that's what they want to do, because gender and sex are connected. If gender didn't exist, they probably wouldn't, well, trans people wouldn't really need to exist, and most definitely they wouldn't need to transition, and they wouldn't be abused by society and have higher risks of suicide. That problem would be kind of solved if gender just stopped existing, and trans people were the ones that actually started breaking down gender in the first place. So this is not an anti-trans thing necessarily. So some ways we can move towards gender abolitionism is, if you own a business or something, just don't gender your products. You don't need to do that, and push for businesses too to not gender products that don't need to be gendered. And in fact, like, no product really needs to be gendered, besides maybe like needs to be sexed, which is a really weird term, but most products, 90%, 95% of the product don't need to be gendered. So just not gendering those products and pushing for those products to not be gendered, that's a good thing. Another thing, even easier than that, is just use the like gender neutral singular they to describe anyone. Just, it doesn't matter what gender they are, you don't need to do that. Just describe everyone as they, unless they're trans and they really want you to use a certain pronoun, or if they're cis and they really want you, like, if someone really asks you not to do that, obviously respect them. But for the most part, just use they. It's really easy to do. We already do it for a lot of things, so why don't we just do it more? And I think the third way to do this is just spread this idea. Why don't we just abolish gender? Maybe share this video, who knows? Anywho, another thing that's very important about patriarchy is that it doesn't actually just harm women, it actually harms men even more, which is kind of a sad thing, because it's usually men that actually try to continue patriarchy. Look at incels. So you have these men that are extremely misogynistic and have this very patriarchal view of women. And part of that is in the fact that as men, they decide to base their self-worth in how much they can dominate women, and how much they can be superior to them, and how much they can use them as really sex objects, and how much they can get laid. This is a cultural idea on how men are men, kind of thing. You're not a man if you're a virgin, kind of deal, or you're not a man if you don't have a woman, or if you can't get a girl. Like, these are really entrenched ideas that we need to just break apart. Feminism has broken down the ideas of what it means to be a woman, right? So you can work now as a woman, you can vote, these sorts of ideas, and more culturally, you are not inferior to men, right? Feminism has broken down these ideas. It hasn't really helped men in this situation, because what it means to be a man hasn't really changed, while what it means to be a woman has changed. So while a woman is not a sex object, they're now a human being, a man still needs, in a way, if they're going to be fully masculine, which many men are insecure about their gender, so they feel the need to be masculine, I guess, then that means women will need to be a sex object. It hasn't changed in the minds of what it means to be a man, right? And so you have men, what it means to be a man is, in many parts, emotionally repressed, lustful, workaholic, buff, have anger issues, big egos. Like, these are not good things, right? And we haven't changed this. And so it's actually hurting men, and a lot of men struggle with this, because it's like, society doesn't actually support you being like any of these things, but at the same time, society pushes that you're supposed to be all of these things if you're a man. It's really dumb, and none of these things have anything to do with if you have a penis. That's a ridiculous idea, the fact that those things have to be connected. If the genders were gone, then we wouldn't need to necessarily change what it means to be a man. You wouldn't be a man. You just would be a person. And you don't need to be any of those things if that group of ideas and attributes doesn't exist. And I feel like that whole idea of what it means to be a man is one of the big things that's actually keeping patriarchy alive. It's what's making it still a problem, despite the fact that feminism has changed what it means to be a woman. So to end this, these issues are extremely nuanced, complex. There's a lot to debate about and a lot to think about. So don't just turn off your minds if you're prone to that. This is something worth thinking about and talking to people about. The world can be a better place, and I think there are two big reasons why it isn't, and why progress is always being slowed in this way. One is religious dogmatism, and the second is people that are apathetic about this stuff. They think, oh, it's not going to change, so I don't really care. Both of those two groups of people are the ones that are actually contributing to this the most. So just if you see yourself in one of those two groups, just try to maybe introspect a little bit. Think, am I actually in one of those groups? And how can I change to not be? Because that's actually hurting people. It's viscerally hurting society and making the world a worse place, rather than adding for progress and making it so people can live better lives. This was the Birth-Fed Angel. Subscribe if you want to. Bye-bye.